Take one down, pass it around. That's up to you. If you ever lose one or need one, I got them on file, but that's up to you. Like this week, there's a verse on there I want you to go back and read. It's just something during the week. If I hope you have study habits and you're reading. If you have nothing else to read or look at, you can go back and look at this. I think the first week we did this outline, I mentioned that all these verses we go over are just 1, 2, 3 verses out of a chapter, out of a book. And so you can always go back and dig and look at those and get a lot more out of it than what I'm giving you, because I'm trying to cram hours and hours and hours of reading and study into a 30-minute lesson. So you can do with what you want to with it, mainly just to help follow along, because I know I speak fast, and we've been having a lot of scripture, and instead of turning to each verse, it's helpful to have it there. But I do that with the intent that you're going to go home and look back over it, because I'd rather you have your Bible here and just flipping with me, but and follow along a little bit better here like this. Thank you, Glenn. I appreciate it, man. All right. So we're starting week 2, sharing the gospel of these, and this week we're going to ask the question, why are we so uneasy? Last week we talked about and we asked the question, what keeps us from sharing the gospel? What has stopped us in the past? And we come up with some good answers, and we're going to touch back on those in a minute. This week, if I get out of order, just bear with me, because this week's more or less a little bit of a review, and then going a little bit deeper in some areas that we touched on last week. And then next week, we're actually going to start looking at the gospel itself, dissecting it, and trying to figure out what that is. Because if we're going to spread the gospel with ease, then we probably need to know what the gospel is. All right, so we're going to get to that next week. But this week, we're going to finish up kind of our second part of why are we having problems sharing the gospel. So I want you to think back to, we'll say this past week, and I want you to think back this week, and I want you to ask yourself this question. How many people, since last Wednesday, we started this study, how many people have I talked to about Jesus? And just think about it in your head. You don't have to answer out loud. Some of you, maybe, hopefully, last week lit a fire up under you, and you went out and you talked to everybody about Jesus. I hope that was the case, but most weeks, we don't talk to anybody about Jesus. And if you went back this month, just bit my tongue, it feels awesome. If you go back this whole month, and you think about how many people did I talk to about Jesus just this past month, probably more than likely it's the same answer. Okay, so the next question is this. I want you to think about this, and I want you to be honest with yourself. Okay, and we touched on this again last week. On the flip side of that question, how many times did you have the thought or the movement inside of you, your heart was telling you, it's like your heart swells up into your throat, and you need to tell somebody about Jesus? How often in the last month, in the last few months, have you had the urge, you felt like you needed to tell somebody or talk to somebody about Jesus, only for you to swallow it, only for you to ignore it, only for you to talk yourself out of it? Now, if you were here on Sunday morning, I had no idea that Shannon was coming up here to share his story. I'm glad he did, because he reminded us that this is not a game. That story should have terrified each and every one of us to never remain silent, that this is a very urgent thing we're doing. There's urgency to this message, to getting it out. There's life or death at stake, and we're told to go. We need to make sure that we're going. But too often we get this feeling, we get this sense that we need to talk to somebody about Jesus, and whatever excuse we gave last week, whether it be that we don't have the time, we don't have the personality, we don't know all the answers, we're scared of what people think of us, and we had some answers all across the board. But whatever answers we gave last week to what hinders us, we let those answers take over our life and over our mindset, and we let that override the need and the urgency to tell somebody about Jesus. So if this message is so important, if it's that important that we get it out there, right? And it's life or death, and it's we desperately need to be telling people, and we know it's an important message. We know that there's some urgency to it. Why is it that we're so uneasy when it comes to sharing it? And the answer is, the reason that a lot of times that we're uneasy about sharing the gospel is because a lot of us are not sharing the gospel regularly, right? A lot of us are uneasy because we're not sharing it regularly. A lot of things we do in life we become good at because we practice it. We do it over and over and over. We make a habit out of it. We continue to work on it, right? Hollis, I talk to him all the time. We're trying something new. We're trying basketball. And with Hollis, since he could walk, he's had a batting tee in his room. And we've hit baseballs. And it's rare I can throw him a pitch and he don't hit it. Basketball's new. Well, he never dribbled a basketball. We never shot a basketball. We never passed a basketball. We don't know why we can't pick it up and run with it. All this is new to him. And I've been trying to explain to him that, hey, it takes practice. It takes repetition. It takes making it a habit. It makes going out there and shooting. There's one little kid, he's out there beating 12-year-olds. He's 8. And it's because every day he goes home and he shoots, he dribbles, he practices. So it's the same thing in our life. Anything, and that's anything in our life, in order to be good at something, we have to make it a habit. We've got to have repetition. We've got to practice it over and over and over. Evangelism, and we talked last week, we defined evangelism as simply going out and sharing the good news about Jesus. Evangelism is a spiritual discipline. And we have to realize that, and we have to understand that, and we have to live our life under that principle that evangelism is a spiritual discipline. So what is a spiritual discipline? When I say a spiritual discipline, that's something that we do led by the Spirit that we practice regularly. All right? So an example of a spiritual discipline would be prayer. Prayer is not something that you're born having a desire for, knowing how to do, right? A lot of us, when we get saved, we don't even know what, now prayer is just simply having a conversation with God, but a lot of people say, I don't know how to pray, or I don't know what to say, or I don't know, and praying, the more comfortable you get in prayer is when you do it more and more often. You make it a habit. It's not something that we desire to do without the Spirit leading us to prayer, leading us to this need to pray, leading us, and the more we pray, the more comfortable we get, the better we become at it, the more regularly we do it. Prayer is a spiritual discipline. Being a member of a church is a spiritual discipline. None of us before Jesus have a desire to be around you guys. Right? A lot of other stuff we can do on Wednesday nights. A lot of other stuff we can do on Sunday mornings. All right? But the idea, the need to be a part of the body, the need to be a part of something bigger and being amongst other members and other Christians is a desire that is we're led by the Spirit to having that desire, right? It's only once we have Jesus, it's only once we have the Spirit leading us that we're able to go into a church, we're able to understand how we function as a church member, what that looks like, how devoted we need to be, how we need to make it a habit and do it over and over and over, right? Things like fasting. Fasting is a spiritual discipline. It's something that a lot of us don't practice regularly, but we should, right? The only way to make it a habit in our life is if we do it over and over and over. Now, again, fasting, unless you're on some kind of crazy diet thing, you're not going to want to fast unless you're being led by the Spirit to do so, right? So it's being led by the Spirit to do something, to make something a habit in your life. Evangelism is a spiritual discipline. You're not going to get good at it until you start to do it. You're not going to ever feel comfortable doing it unless you start to do it. We're always going to have this uneasy feeling when it comes for us, the moment comes for us to tell somebody about Jesus. We're always going to have an excuse. We're always going to feel uncomfortable. We're always going to feel awkward. We're always going to feel out of place. We're always going to feel like people are judging us until we start to do it over and over and over. Again, nobody wants to go to somebody and tell them about Jesus. Nobody wants to go and tell somebody, hey, there was a guy, he was alive, he died, he rose again. It was 2,000 years ago, but he still loves you. Just in the worldly sphere out there, that doesn't make any sense. None of us are desiring to go tell somebody about it unless There's something bigger than us driving us to tell that story. Because we have a relationship with Jesus, because we possess the Spirit is leading us to evangelism. It's up to us to practice it regularly so that we are more comfortable with it, so that we're able to go out and get past all these, what we're going to discover are lies that we're being told that keep us and hinder us from going out and spreading the gospel more, all right? So last week, why are we not making that a regular habit? Why is it that we're not doing it more often? Last week I told you I made two statements, and one of them was, oh yeah, we already knew that statement, and one of them kind of shocked us because we've never really thought about it too much. Last week I told you guys and girls that God has a purpose for your life, right? You think back, we read Matthew 28, 18 through 20, where Jesus he's about to leave, and he's saying, hey, you go and you tell everybody that you come in contact with about me. And then in Acts 1:8, he says the same thing. Y'all go and you tell everybody you come in contact with about me. I'm going to empower you to do so. You go out and you tell the world, right? God has a purpose for your life. That purpose is that our lives glorify Him, all right? Glorifying Him means that we're going out and we're doing things that paint a positive light on God, that point a positive light to Jesus, right? So anything we do that glorifies God, that's what God desires from us, and we will never do anything that glorifies Him more than living a life that's obedient and pleasing to Him. The main thing we need to be obedient to is the last command He gave us, which was to go. So God's purpose for your life is to go out and to tell people that He loves them, that He wants a relationship with Him. His purpose for your life is to go, is to be vocal, is to talk. His purpose for you is evangelism. That's what God's purpose for your life is, all right? The second statement I made that was kind of a shocker, because if you're like me, you don't really ever think about this. Satan also has a purpose for your life. And that's kind of where we're gonna park at for a little bit tonight and dive into that a little bit more. But Satan's purpose for your life, if you were here last week, we talked about his preferred direction for your life is the exact opposite of God's direction for your life. So if God has told you, and Christ was really clear on this earth when He told us, go make disciples, in other words, go and tell people about me, tell them everything you witnessed, tell them everything you felt, tell them everything I've told you, right? Most importantly, tell them how much I love them. If that's God's purpose for your life, then Satan's saying, my purpose for your life is to do the opposite. I don't want you to go and talk. I want you to stay and be quiet, right? That's what Satan wants for your life, right? Because if we do that, then no one will ever be reached for Jesus. Why is his goal for you to stay silent? Think about his overall goal in this entire existence, right? What is Satan's overall purpose? To pack hell with as many souls as he can possibly get down there. That's what he wants. He don't want a single soul going to heaven. He don't want a single soul to know Jesus. He wants to keep those that know about Jesus silent. He wants those that have given their life to Jesus to be silent, because if nobody ever knows about Jesus, then they are destined for hell. People that do not know about Jesus are destined for hell. People that do not have a relationship with Jesus are destined for hell, all right? So the best way to keep people headed toward hell is to never give them an option to even respond to Jesus, because nobody's told them about Jesus. So Satan's main goal, to get as many people in hell as he possibly can, the best way to go about that is to find those people that have given their life to Jesus and keep them quiet, right? So what that means for you is this. The very second that you give your life to Jesus, you're on Satan's hit list. You're now a target. You've painted a target on your back, and you've told Satan, hey, I'm now the opposition. Just a second ago, I was on your team. I was silent. I was not a threat. But now I'm on fire for Jesus. All of a sudden, Satan is coming at you, and he is coming at you hard, and he's going to come at you at all costs. Satan is always on the attack, all right? 1 Peter chapter 5, verse number 8. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. He is always seeking a way to bring you down, to make you be quiet, to keep you from not going, from not achieving your purpose that God's given you of going and telling people about Him. And so He's going to do whatever it takes to make sure that you remain silent and that you remain where you're at. You're not making an attempt to go out and tell people about Jesus. And He's very, very good at what He does. He knows exactly what it's going to take to make you uncomfortable, which, by the way, is all it takes to keep you silent. A little discomfort, right? He knows exactly where you're vulnerable. He knows what lies He needs to feed you in order to convince you that you're not capable of sharing the gospel. He's going to tell you things like, hey, you ain't got the time. You got too much going on. Your kids are playing sports. You're working extra hours. You got all this going on. He's going to tell you that you're an introvert, that it's not your personality to go out and tell people about Jesus. The biggest lie He tells us is, hey, you don't have the knowledge to be talking about Jesus, right? You don't know the answers. They're going to ask you stuff you don't know. They're going to ask you stuff that you've never even thought about. You better just keep your mouth shut, right? He tells us stuff like that because He knows that's all it takes. That's all it takes to keep us quiet and keep us exactly where we are, all right? But here's the thing, though. Satan attacking us is not the problem because we know that's coming. We've been told, we've been warned beforehand, hey, that Satan is coming for us. His army is coming for us. There's going to be attacks. There's going to be times where he tries to bring us down. There's going to be things he does to try to keep us quiet. These things are all coming. The problem that we have is when we try to combat Satan ourselves, or we just don't combat him at all. We just take what he's saying and we roll with it, right? The problem is that we try to take on these attacks, we try to defeat these lies by ourselves, or we just let them eat us up until we just cripple ourselves. The only way to overcome these lies that Satan tells us are to rely on God, right? 1 Peter 5, that whole text, we took verse number 8 out of it, but here's the whole text. He's telling us exactly how we're supposed to be relying on God. He says in verse number 6, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time He may exalt you. And then we have verse number 7, casting all your anxieties on Him, because He cares for you. Verse number 8 that we just read, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. The only way that we can ever get around these attacks that Satan gives us, that Satan feeds us, is relying on God's power and not on our own, right? And here's the even better news. These weaknesses that Satan tells us about, these weaknesses that Satan convinces us we have, that we lack knowledge, that our personality isn't fit, that of an evangelist, that it's not up to us to go out and spread the gospel, or we don't have the time, and all these things. Those very weaknesses that Satan used to keep us quiet, these are the weaknesses that God uses to make His story even louder and to show out. Paul says this in 2 Corinthians 12:9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon you. These things that Satan tells us, these lies that we talked about last week, if we let them, they'll keep us from ever telling anybody about Jesus. But if we ever turn those around and we ever just let God work through us, then we never will understand the true power of God until the introvert goes out and has a conversation about Jesus and feels the Spirit moving through that conversation. Or when you feel like you don't have the answers and someone comes to you and approaches you and you feel like you need to tell them about Jesus and you feel like you're not prepared or you don't have all the answers, but you start to talk to them about Christ and you see God move through that conversation, even though you may not know everything there is to know about the Bible. At those moments when your weaknesses are identified and you know that those weaknesses are there, but you refuse to let them be an obstacle, that's when you're going to truly see God work and God show out and God do some really cool stuff in your life and the lives of others. And that's what he's talking about back in Matthew 28 and Acts chapter 1 when we looked at those verses last week where we said that Christ told us to go. He also told us He's going to empower us. So He tells us to go and to tell people about Him, but He never expected us to do it alone. He never expected us to go out and to fight Satan by ourselves, or to go out and to tell people and think that we had to know everything ourselves and we had to have the best personality and we got to have all this free time. He knew it was going to be hard. He knew that it was going to be difficult. He knew that Satan was going to be coming after us. That's why he said, y'all go, and I'm going to give you what you need. I'm going to give you what's going to sustain you. I'm going to give you the power to go out and to reach this world if you will just go. He didn't say, hey, go home and study, learn everything you can, and then go. He didn't say, hey, go home and take care of all your chores, go home and make sure your lawn's cut and all this stuff's done, and then go. He didn't say, hey, y'all go build up your personality, y'all go take some extrovert classes. I don't know if that exists. And then you can go. Right? No, he just said, y'all go. Right now, I'm leaving. Y'all go. I'm going to give you the Spirit, and actually read the Spirit's unleashed, and people just go. And it is a crazy thing. It's not that the Spirit's not moving now. It's that we have stopped allowing the Spirit to work through us. We've stopped practicing this spiritual discipline of evangelism, and we have let Satan overcome the excitement of the gospel by telling us these lies that have hindered us from ever going out. All right? So all it really comes down to is this. Once we know that we have what it takes, no matter what our excuse is, you have right now inside of you what it takes to go out and tell somebody about Jesus. All right? All it comes down to is this. Am I going to be influenced by the lies of Satan, or am I going to be influenced by the truth of Christ? And it's really that simple. Right? If you are choosing to remain silent, then you are allowing Satan to influence you more than you are allowing Christ to influence your life. Christ has told you to go. Satan said stay. Which one are you doing? Who are you letting influence you more? All right? Let me prove that to you, because some of you are looking at me kind of puzzled, right? How many of you like sharing good news with somebody? Right? One of the worst things ever is when you hear really, really good news and someone says, but don't say anything yet. Y'all all know how hard that is, right? Had that conversation today with somebody. Somebody said, hey, I got some good news, but let them tell you, and then they told me anyway, right? It's hard. I don't know how good you are at keeping secrets, but the worst thing ever is somebody tell you, hey, I got good news, and they tell you the good news, and they say, just don't tell anybody yet, because we all want to be the good news bearer, right? We want to be the ones, not bearer, right? Everybody wants to be a bear. Anyways, I digress. Good news bearers. Thank you, Griffin. I appreciate you, man. It's hard to keep that secret. But sometimes we let the excitement of the good news override the instruction of being quiet. All right? When Dallas got pregnant with Hollis, we were really excited. We told my mom, her mom and dad and Leah. That was it. We didn't tell nobody else. We told them, hey, don't tell anybody, because we're going to go to the doctor, get everything checked out, and then we'll tell everybody. All right? And I remember how excited everybody was, and grandparents, you've probably been in the same boat, and your kids are having, I'm sure it's exciting, you're a grandparent for the first time. Everybody's happy, everybody's excited, everybody's wanting to tell somebody, right? And I remember Mom calling me to tell me that she told some woman in Kansas on the phone because she just couldn't wait. But she knew that nobody in Kansas knowing would get back to Alabama. So somebody from Kansas called her at work, and she's like, well, I got you on the phone. I'm going to be a grandma. She just had to get the news out. When you have good news, you want to share it. And sometimes that news is so exciting that you can't help but tell people, right? We have to keep that restriction from letting that excitement get out. With the gospel, the opposite is true, all right? In us, we possess right now the greatest news that has ever been given to the world. The excitement that we possess with having that news inside of us, having knowledge about Jesus, knowing that there's people lost and all that they need is to hear about Jesus. The excitement that we should possess to get the news to them should override any restrictions that Satan has given you. So if you're an introvert and you don't feel good talking to people. It makes you feel uneasy. The excitement about Jesus should override that. You should be fine babbling words like I do every Sunday, because you're so excited you can't be quiet. You don't have the time. The excitement of Jesus, the excitement of what he offers, the excitement of knowing that these people are dying and going to hell, but you have their safety line that you're going to help them get out of hell. That excitement of having that knowledge should help you clear anything you have on your calendar to make sure that you're doing that. The excitement of Jesus should override any lie that has ever been told to you by Satan to keep you from telling people about Jesus. If we have a hard time keeping the news about our grandbabies or about things that are happening in our life or small things like that, if we have a hard time keeping that in, how in this world are we keeping in the good news about Jesus so easily? This is where John and Peter found themselves at, right? Early on, the church is getting going. The Spirit's moving. You read back at the end of the Gospels, Peter's denying Jesus. He at one point wants nothing to do with Jesus. Jesus comes and says, hey, y'all need to go. You need to tell everybody about me. I'm going to give you the Spirit. The Spirit hits Peter, and Peter just loses his mind. I mean, he starts doing some stuff that is unheard of, that if it happened here, we get uncomfortable when somebody walks up and starts speaking unannounced. If somebody starts speaking in like 50 different languages, then we're going to lose our mind for real. That's what Peter's doing, right? Peter is so excited that he can't be contained. And so these leaders, these religious leaders, these men of the law that they're threatened by Jesus, they got rid of Jesus, and now you've got all his followers going out running their mouth, and we've got to stop them somehow. So these men, they go out and they basically arrest John and Peter, and when they get them in, stuff's still happening, right? The word's still spreading. Miracles are happening, and the crowds are demanding for Peter and John, and this council that arrests John and Peter are like, what do we do? We can't kill them because they're going to revolt. What can we do? And one of them says, hey, I know, we're going to give them a stern warning. We're going to look them in the eyes. We just killed Jesus, right? We're going to look Peter and John in the eyes. We're going to tell them, hey, you better not ever, we're going to let you go, but you better not ever mention Jesus ever again. Now, they're in captivity, whatever you want to call it, and they tell them this. They look Peter in the eyes, and they tell him, don't talk about Jesus ever again. And this is what Peter says to the very people that arrested him. He doesn't say, all right, I understand, and then goes out and just kind of starts telling people about Jesus. He says this to the very people that have him held captive. But Peter and John answered them, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than God, you judge. Verse number 20, for we cannot but speak of what we have seen and heard. In other words, even if we wanted to listen to you, even if we were just a tad bit afraid of you, even if this threat held any water whatsoever, we can't help but talk about Jesus. In other words, hey man, I know you're telling us to hush. It's out of our hands. We're so excited about Jesus. We're so excited about what that Jesus has done, what we've witnessed Jesus do with his life. We're so excited about the things that we saw him do and the words he spoke and the lives he's changed. We're so excited about what he's done in our life that even if we were afraid of being thrown in prison, even if we were afraid of having our head chopped off, even if we were afraid of being crucified, we can't stop. We're addicted to it. It's all I can do to not be telling you. In fact, he preached to them. It's all I can do not to be talking about it right now. You're going to let us go, and we're going to go preach until you kill us. And that's what they did. In other words, in that moment, Peter measured out in his mind, what is more important? My physical life right now or the gospel? And he quickly responded, give me the gospel. I'm going to go talk about Jesus. None of this other stuff y'all can throw at me, none of it matters because I understand how important this message is. So if we're ever going to get to the place in our life where we are able to override any discomfort, we're able to override any lie that Satan throws our way that would keep us from talking about Jesus everywhere we go, we have to grasp that same truth, the importance of this message that we're carrying. the importance that people's lives are at stake. That if we ever stop talking about it, hell is going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that while we're on our way to heaven, while we have eternity to look forward to, there are people next door to us, all the way across the world, but even next door to us, that do not have a relationship with Jesus. And the most important thing we can do with our life is to tell them about Him. Until we're willing to lay down our comfort to tell people about Jesus, they'll never know about Him. Your temporary discomfort is far less important than others' eternal life. People's eternity is at stake. This is a very real thing. We're not out there trying to rake up numbers to say we had 150 people in church. We're not out there to make sure that we've got money in the bank and we're trying to grow the biggest church club that we've ever had. This is a very real thing. That people's lives are at stake. People are going to hell by the second because we are staying silent in a lot of areas. Let's look at Acts chapter number 8. Acts chapter number 8. Now, as we read this, I want you to think about how easy it is for Satan to convince you to be quiet. He's told you don't have the answers. He's told you don't have the time. He's told you that you don't have the personality. He's told you all these different things that people are going to look at you funny, that people are going to kick you out of your friends group or whatever. These are the small discomforts in our life that keep us from telling about Jesus. And then I want you to look at Acts chapter 8, verse number 1 through 3, and then we're going to look at verse number 4. And Saul, who later became Paul, this is before Paul found Jesus. This is when Saul is destroying the church. And Saul approved of his execution, and there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria except the apostles. Devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. But Saul was ravaging the church, entering the house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. So we've just had Stephen stoned to death. We have groups of men that formed, and they are ready to keep the church quiet any way they can. So they pick out one of the greatest men that we have on record, Stephen, who did nothing but give his life to Jesus and preach message after message, love people after people, to tell them about what Jesus had done, who Jesus was. And then these religious men, quote unquote, religious experts of the law, have decided we've got to keep them quiet, so let's all have this public stoning and teach everyone that if you talk about Jesus, we will stone you to death. And so that's what they do. They drag Stephen out, they stone him to death, as Saul is sitting there holding everybody's jacket, allowing it to take place. And then they begin to go house to house. They've now set an example. They've now said, if you talk about Jesus, we will kill you. And now Saul goes house to house, dragging people out in the street, throwing them in prison, having them killed for even uttering the name Jesus. Now again, we won't talk about Jesus at work because we're scared of what social impact it's going to have in our life. We might lose a Facebook friend. We might not get invited to lunch. We might not get invited to somebody's house. We're going to make people uncomfortable. We're going to make ourselves uncomfortable. We'll let that hinder us. People are literally losing their life. Not being put to sleep by a lethal injection. These people are being drugged into the street and being made an example out of. People are stoning them in the streets while everyone else watches, while they talk about how wrong it is to follow Jesus. And this is what the church decides to do. Verse number 4. Now those who were scattered went about preaching the word. How uncomfortable do you think it was to talk about Jesus after you just saw your best friend get stoned in the street for it? You think anybody at that point was saying, I'm kind of an introvert. I don't really want to talk about Jesus. Do you think anybody at that point ever said, you know what, I just ain't got the time for Jesus. I got a lot going on at work. I've got some extra stuff I got to do. Do you think anybody said, hey, I'm afraid of what people are going to say about me? No, they're being stoned to death in the streets, and they still are willingly getting up and preaching. knowing that their life, they wasn't hoping that their life, they didn't get caught. They knew they were going to get caught. They knew that they were going to get stoned too. Their goal at that point was to tell as many people about Jesus before they got caught, before they got stoned to death. That's how excited they were about the Word. That's how excited they were about telling people about Jesus. That's how excited they were about making sure that everybody knew that there is a hell and they've got the key out of it. That they need to get the news about how much Jesus loves them, what Jesus did for them by giving his life for them. They knew that it was up to them to get that news to them, and there was nothing that they was not willing to risk, including their life, in order to get that news out. And then we let silly things like time and being introverted and not knowing the knowledge, we let that stuff hinder us from doing exactly what they were doing at a much greater cost. So what could drive somebody to do that? What could drive somebody to risk their life watching their friend, watching their mentor, watching the very man that gave them the news, watching him being stoned to death, and then willingly going out and telling people about Jesus? What could drive them to lay down any discomfort, any fear, anything that frightened them, lay that all aside to go and talk about Jesus? And the answer is they got it. They understood what was at stake. They understood how important it was. They understood that it was way more important than their life. It was way more important than their discomfort. It was way more important than their homes. And listen to me. We tell ourselves things like we don't have the knowledge. Some of these people had only known Jesus for a few days. This is not after a lifetime of being in church and they finally had the courage to go out and preach. These people were being converted as the Acts keeps rolling on, and they're learning about Jesus. They're so on fire about Jesus, so excited, that then they're willing to go out and talk about it. Do you think they had a knowledge of every word that was in the Old Testament at that point? No. Some may have, but not all of them. All they knew that was Jesus loved them and Jesus changed their life, and we need to talk about it. They understood the importance of that message, and we don't. And because we don't, we're staying silent. While they were willing to risk their life, we use excuses like I'm introverted, I don't have the time, I don't have the knowledge, I'm scared of what somebody's going to say. We let those excuses keep us from telling anybody about Jesus. And because we're silent, because we don't understand the importance of this message, because we're not as excited as they were, and that we're letting the obstacles Satan throws our way override and get in the way and dampen our excitement, people are flocking to hell right now. As we're sitting here, as you're listening to me, there are people dying and going to hell right now because they do not know about Jesus, because we haven't told them, because we've stayed silent. And we've stayed silent because we'll let something as small as discomfort keep us from telling about Jesus. In no scenario should your discomfort be bigger than the message of Jesus, than the love of Jesus. So I want you to ask, I put this question at the bottom of your paper. I want you to think about that this week. What are you making more important than people's eternal life right now? In other words, what thing are you using, what excuse are you using that hinders you from telling somebody about Jesus? When somebody comes to your desk at work, or when you encounter somebody at Casey's and you have that feeling inside of you, your heart swells up and you feel the need to go and talk to them about Jesus, what is it that keeps you from doing it? Because whatever that is, that's a lie from Satan. Because we're told we have everything we need to talk about Jesus. We have it already. We possess the Spirit. If you've given your life to Jesus, you've got it inside of you. You may have given your life to Jesus yesterday. You may do it tonight. At that point, you have what it takes inside of you to go and to tell somebody about how great Jesus is. All this stuff in our head that tells you can't do it, it's lies. Satan is the master of lies. He knows exactly what he needs to tell you. If you stay silent, you are allowing him to influence you more than Jesus. And you should be ashamed of yourself. I know I'm ashamed of myself. What is it that's keeping you from sharing the gospel? And this week, I want you to work on handing that over to God. Giving it to him, saying, hey, God, Satan's got me tricked. Satan's got me fooled, but I know you are more powerful than that. I'm giving you this. And pray that God sends you exactly who he needs to send you and that you'll be willing to talk about it. Let's pray. Father, we want to thank you tonight for just allowing each and every individual that's in this room to be here. God, they're here for a reason. I pray that this message sits with us all week and we really evaluate our life and we really assess our life and ask ourselves, why have we been so silent? God, the truth is we think about one or two instances where we remain silent, but God, we come in contact with so many people during the week, so many chances to talk about Jesus, and we don't because we just haven't made it a habit. We haven't made it routine. We haven't made it the most important thing in our life, and I pray that changes. I pray that you move us to make this priority one. The most important thing we can do with our life is to tell people about you, to go, to talk, to tell people how much you love them. God, help us to be excited about that. Help us to be enthusiastic about that. God, move us. Continue to give us opportunities. Continue to send those to us that need to know about you. God, if there's anyone in here tonight that doesn't know you, I pray that you move in their life. That you push them to respond to your love and to your truth. God, there's a very real hell out there. And I pray they give their life to you before it's too late, Lord. We love you and we thank you for everything that you're doing in our lives and in this church. I pray that you continue to give us places to go and people to talk to. We love you and we thank you for it all.